What is that sound? Is it the sound of an expectant heartbeat? Is it the sound of sorrow? It isn't loud, nor is it dramatic. It is the sound of a breath being held, of sandals walking on stone, of prayers being whispered without words, of cries silent in their tears. Good Friday isn't for explaining. It isn't for religious tradition or custom. It's for remembering. It's for entering into that sacred stillness of the soul, where we come not to analyze the cross, but to open our hearts, to open our minds, and allow the cross to speak to us. It's for us to walk together and feel the weight that has been carried across centuries, across continents, across experiences, and now, in this sacred place, in this sacred stillness, we see the cross placed in the middle of our very own lives. This is an opportunity to feel the grief, to experience the sorrow, to recall what one may call tragedy. It is the opportunity to go inward and see where we stand in the story, the experience, the journey of Good Friday. May we begin. The first stop along our journey is Jerusalem, a familiar place to many. But that day things were not familiar. The streets were tense, dusty, and heavy. People were gathered not for joy or celebration, but for condemnation. And there he was, the master teacher, the way shower, and no one could recognize him. He was bruised and bleeding. He was carrying the thing that would kill him. What mockery as they placed a robe on his shoulders and thorns on his head. As I stood there in the intensity of it all, there was shouting, there was screaming, there was crying, there was anger, and there was confusion. There was even gloating. And they called it a king's procession? This was no king's procession. This was more like a funeral march. I imagine a woman there, just a face in the crowd. Or maybe not. You know, she didn't know him, and at the same time, she looked at him with a compassion, a loving, longing gaze that only a mother could have. I knew she wasn't his mother. I knew she had no direct relation to him. But in that moment, something about him broke her open. When she looked at him, she remembered every man who had been falsely accused, and it stirred deep within her because she remembered her own son. As she looked upon him, she had an empathy, and she had a level of understanding that only a mother could have for her child. As she stood firm in her gaze, she remembered every mother who had ever wept for a son. Every hope that had ever died too young. And in that very moment, I was consumed by her sorrow and her strength. I was whisked away instantly into a place of looking upon the cross. And I felt it. I felt the resonation of Mary Magdalene staring at the cross, questioning, what does this all mean? How did we spend days together, weeks together, years together? And now all that was taught, all that was shown, all that we've come to know and trust is falling apart. I'm trying to stay strong, her heart called out. I'm trying to remember what you've asked me to do and how you've called me to be in these moments. I'm trying. I could feel the energy of her soul speaking to me. And she said, "Don't look away. You know this part of the journey. Be still. Be still. This moment is holy." As I listened to her comfort my soul, I took in a deep breath, and I could hear the criminals who hung there beside him. "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." And I could hear the other rebuking him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And then he said to Jesus, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And I can remember Jesus' voice, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." And now we journey to El Salvador. In El Salvador, they walk through the streets. Bare feet, crosses heavy, incense curling into prayers. And they chant, "Perdonanos, Señor." Forgive us, Lord. Perdonanos, Señor. Forgive us, Lord. Not because of what happened once, because it still happens now. As I stood there, I saw a couple. I'm sure it was a husband and wife, but even more so, I'm sure it was a father and mother, because they carried a child with them. Do you see them? He's not speaking, and she's holding back her tears. As they approach the cross, they place their child at the foot of the cross. They bow their heads, and then they raise their eyes, and as they sit there in silent gaze, this is their prayer. Looking upon this reminded me of an experience I had in the Philippines. I remember seeing a man kneeling by a cross. He sat in quiet reverence. Some choose the nails, real nails, not for show, but in solidarity. As Christ was crucified, I recall a man, arms stretched on a wooden beam, being persecuted for his love of Christ. I could hear him whisper, "If Christ suffered for me, let me suffer for those who have no voice." His blood wasn't the point. His intention was. As he embodied the Christ, as he recalled his Jesus, it was his consciousness, his surrender, that reminded us of how Jesus showed us the way. I remember that man in the Philippines kneeling by a cross, as he was remembering the man that went before us. Perhaps it was his friend. Perhaps it was his opportunity to see Jesus and understand it was his intention. It was his conscious surrender to show us the way. When Jesus knew that all was now finished, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was standing there. They put a sponge full of wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. The cross was changed that day. It became greater in meaning, greater in mystery, greater in the presence of what it would mean for years to come. I recall in Ethiopia, that on Good Friday they rise before the dawn and they chant as they walk barefoot through the dust. Do you see him there? There's an elder, and he speaks. We remember because the cross is not a decoration, it is a doorway, and you must walk through it barefoot, so it changes you. This isn't just a story, it's a path. This is a path that has been put out before us since the beginning of time. The path was there when all the crowds who had gathered there for this spectacle saw what had taken place. The path was there as they returned home beating their breast. And all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, as they stood at a distance watching these things, the path was there. And we have never been called to look away. We have been called to feel the ache in our chests and to stay. Maybe there's something that you've been hanging on the cross. Or maybe there's something that it's time you hang it on the cross. Is it a burden? Is it a memory? A wound? What if tonight you lay it down? What if you hand it to Joseph of Arimathea, who was waiting expectantly for the kingdom of God? And he went to Pilate and he asked for the body of Jesus. And when he took it down, he wrapped it in a linen cloth and laid it in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever laid. This was the day of preparation, and the women who had come with him, they saw his body in the tomb, and they prepared spices and ointments. There was no shame. This was surrender. What if you tonight find that something that's been hanging, that's been there with you, and you allow it to now be taken down, not in shame, but in surrender. Surrender. What a powerful word. Is to surrender to give up, is to surrender to admit defeat, is to surrender to wave a white flag because we cannot fight anymore. No. Surrender is to embody the words that Jesus said, "It is finished." You may ask, what is finished? What is this surrender? We're surrendering the pain. We're surrendering the idea that love was going to lose. We're surrendering the illusions and the stories that have bound us in captivity. We're surrendering the idea that anything can come against us that cannot be triumphed by love. We're surrendering all the myths, all the lies, all the doubts, and all the fears. Maybe what we're called to surrender is that lie that we're alone in our suffering, or that suffering is even a thing. Maybe we're being called to see things in a new way, to view our suffering as learning, to view our surrender as the beginning step through the doorway, to view what we are seeing on this holy, sacred Good Friday, a gift of remembering. Tonight, we will leave in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because the silence says it all. Let the darkness do its work.